Welcome to the Point of No Return podcast, a show at the intersection of technology and strategy. On this show, we interview industry leaders and experts to better understand how they think about strategy during this time of exponential progress.
Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to another episode of the Point of No Return podcast. I think we're up to episode 41, and one of the reasons I really enjoy having this podcast is just because of the variety and nature of people that I meet. For instance, last week, CEO of this huge YouTube media company. This week, I spoke with Renjie Butalid, Associate Director at the McGill Dobson Centre for Entrepreneurship. So really going deep into how McGill, specifically McGill Dobson Centre, thinks about entrepreneurship and all the different activities they're doing. Renjie himself, he's an award-winning entrepreneur, really smart. His work lies at the intersection of tech startups, social innovation, and civic engagement. In his current role, he oversees the center's entrepreneurship and mentorship programs, including the Lean Startup Program, McGill Dobson Cup, and the McGill X-1 Accelerator. So I learned a lot about these three in particular, which, I've heard about, but you really understand kind of the big impact that they're having. And we went pretty deep. We spoke about his career path from being an entrepreneur to leading one of the most important entrepreneurship programs in the country. So far they have 125 active startups, 2.6 thousand entrepreneurs trained, and over $100 million raised to date. We also spoke about why he's excited about the future of entrepreneurship. We spoke about the Dobson Center's 4 core programs and the plans that they're looking to how to utilize the $2 million that he just raised. So Renjie's soft-spoken, super smart. I didn't really understand or appreciate, I should say, the depth and breadth of Dobson Center's activities, and I really enjoyed the conversation. Renjie, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Really happy that you took the time today, man. Really start with kind of a simple question. Why are you interested in entrepreneurship?
I think when it comes to entrepreneurship, it comes back to my own curiosity with the world. Ever since I was younger, I've always been of the mindset of understanding and trying to understand what the rules are, to sort of see how far I could push the rules, and if some cases the rules don't make sense, to change them, right? And entrepreneurship in many ways embodies that. The idea that you're taking something that didn't exist before, an idea, turning it into something that's tangible and putting it out to the world and seeing how people respond to it, and then continuing to build from there. If you look at my own educational history, I went to school to study economics first to understand how the world worked from the perspective of economics. But then I realized I needed to ground myself in political science as well too, because economics doesn't operate in a vacuum. I needed to understand the political structure that we all exist in. And so I did a minor in political science. So after school, somehow I found myself in the world of entrepreneurship. I think a lot of it had to do with being at the University of Waterloo. When I was going through school at Waterloo, there was this shift that was happening that was bigger than the university itself. People went to Waterloo for the co-op program. They do one semester in school and then another semester working for a big company, with a goal of working for a company like BlackBerry, RIM, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, what have you. But somewhere along the way, it kind of shifted to the co-op terms turning into an opportunity to build your startup. And there was this ecosystem that was emerging at the university and around the Waterloo region to help startups grow. I also like to think that I had a front row seat to that, because while I was busy with student government at Waterloo, my roommate, Ilya Grigorik, was busy working away on a product that eventually became 8RSS. They rebranded to PostRank, and then it was bought out by Google. And seeing him, Ilya, on his journey of being an entrepreneur, turning into a founder and CEO, and eventually getting his company, raising some capital from some VCs, and then getting his company acquired by Google, I realized, it's possible. I have an example to point to. And then I think since then, it's just been a really interesting ride.
Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, I didn't know that part of your background, right? So you kind of saw it happen firsthand, and you're like, hey, this thing is not just something that you read about online. It's a real thing. But if I understand, you also started as an entrepreneur, right? So you had a few different roles. If you could explain your background of how you started there that led you to McGill, I'd be curious to see that path.
For sure. So I have a Bachelor of Arts in economics. And it's one of those things where even when I was in school, I was trying to figure out, how do I get into tech entrepreneurship? I have no background in programming or developing things, but I eventually picked up some really basic HTML, figured out how to build a WordPress website, and figure out some basic design at some point. But really going into that mindset of, how do I get into this? And I happened to come across who's now a mentor, and he told me, this lesson that still sticks with me today is like, look, you can still be in the tech entrepreneurship space, even if you don't have a background in technology, or development, software development. One example he used was...
Who was it, sorry?
He was a speaker named James Spurley,
okay,
who came to, Waterloo way back when. This was like over 10 years ago. And he told me, he said, think of a pizza business, right? You don't just have the person making the pizza in the background. You also have the cashier. You have the person who's marketing the pizza business. You have the person that's driving the car to deliver the pizza. So there are all these different things that make a pizza business run. It's not just the person in the back making this amazing, delicious pizza. And I think as soon as I saw that and I shifted my mindset and my thinking from, I'm limited by the skills that I have and the degree that I was pursuing, to, I could actually apply a lot of the things that I'm learning in all of my courses, my business courses, my economics courses, and even my poli-sci courses to the world around me. I thought that was really fascinating.
And what led you then to McGill?
Long story short, I met a girl in Toronto.
It always starts with a girl.
It always starts with a girl. I met a girl in Toronto, December 2014. And I think on our second date, she tells me, just so you know, I applied for this job in Montreal. I got an interview. I'm just waiting to hear back. If I get the job, I'm moving to Montreal. So I tell her, okay, we'll figure it out. And she's like, what? This is our second date. What's going on? But then she moved to Montreal, January 2015. I was working on a startup at the time. And at the time, the startup ran out of funding. I was also in a position where, nothing was really tying me in Toronto. And so I made the move to, Montreal, July 2015. Worked on a few things while I was here in the city, connected with a number of people, that were in the startup space. Noah Redler was one of them, who was at Nauman House.
Former guest
time.
of the show.
Yeah. Rami Sayar, from Microsoft, who's now in New York City, a number of other people. And then, when an opening came up at the Dobson Centre for Entrepreneurship at McGill by way of a friend of mine who told me that I would be perfect for the role, I applied and I got interviewed and I got the job. Mm-hmm. And I think a large part of it may have been to do with a recommendation letter that I got. And this is something that I always keep in mind, like keep your connections and those bridges open with all the people that you've worked with, because you never know where it's going to come in handy. I used to work for a professor at the University of Waterloo named Professor Frances Wesley. She headed up an organization called Social Innovation Generation, former professor here at McGill. And so when I was looking for recommendations, after I had left working for her, she told me that I had an open door for a recommendation anytime I wanted. And so I reached out to her, and she, from what I know, gave me a great recommendation. And so I found myself at McGill, running the Dobson Centre for Entrepreneurship and the programs out of the center.
Okay, so if I understand, you're responsible for the 4 main programs. Describe what you're actually responsible for.
So that's a really good question. I think if you take a step back and look at what the Dobson Centre for Entrepreneurship is, the mission is to find, teach, and develop entrepreneurs out of McGill. And so there are 2 tracks to what we do. On one hand, there's the academic track, where the professors out of Desautels, out of McGill, that are associated with the Dobson Centre for Entrepreneurship, they teach courses in entrepreneurship for concentrations for the BCom students, as well as minors in entrepreneurship for a number of the other students across the university. That's the academic track. So students go to class and they learn from the teachers, from their peers, and so on. The second track, which is where our areas of focus are the entrepreneurship programs, the extracurricular, the experiential learning pieces, if you will. So there are three main programs that we run. There's the McGill Dobson Cup, our flagship program, which we started in 2009, and we're going into our 10th anniversary in 2018. Where we started out with a $1,500 startup competition, and now we're awarding over $100,000.
So you started $1,500, and now it's $100,000.
Now it's over $100,000. In large, to awarding them to the most promising McGill startups across four tracks: social enterprise, health sciences, innovation-driven enterprise, and small-medium enterprise. Thanks in large part to a national bank who stepped in and gave us some money to help support that. On the back of the Dobson Cup, we realized we needed a program to help some of these later stage startups that ideally had won the McGill Dobson Cup, to help accelerate the growth of their companies. And so, it was one of those things where we looked around and saw what else everyone else was doing, and we settled on what MIT was doing in terms of providing entrepreneurship teaching and support and the entrepreneurship programs they were running. And so we learned from their Global Founder Skills Accelerator program, now called Delta V, and we took what we learned from MIT and adopted and adapted that to the McGill X-1 Accelerator program. Mm-hmm. So since 2015, we've been running a summer program where we take the later stage McGill startups and we work with them to get them investment ready by the fall.
So that's X+1 essentially.
X1.
X1.
It's the idea. It's named after Chuck Yeager, the pilot who flew the X1 plane and was the first plane to break the sound barrier.
Oh wow! Okay, I was about to ask you where the name
came from. So yeah. it was that idea of so we're really accelerating the growth.
It's helping startups achieve, let's say, escape velocity. Essentially.
Basically, yeah. Just like so they have to be able to lift off the ground, so they have a non-zero chance of succeeding, right? Because we all know the 9 out of 10 startups fail, or the vast majority of startups fail. So how do we create an environment that allows them to just succeed, right? And then the third program is the McGill Lean Startup Program, and this is a program where we recognized we needed an even earlier program before the Dobson Cup, where we took teams. They're not even companies at this point in time. Teams that were ideally working on groundbreaking research or technology, ideally out of McGill, that they had but didn't quite know how to commercialize. And so we walked them through the Lean Startup Program, a 10-week program in the fall where we get them to validate their hypotheses, to talk to their customers, to work on their pitch, so that in the winter when we hold the Dobson Cup, they're ready and they're very competitive. And then in the summer, we do the Accelerator Program, the X1, and then back in the fall, we go back into the Lean Startup and so on. But right after the X1, we've started doing these demo day events. We started here in Montreal, but then increasingly so we're being pulled to different cities, San Francisco and Boston last year, San Francisco and Boston again this year, and we're also adding Toronto and New York. We're being pulled to these cities by McGill alumni in those areas, saying, look, we love coming to Montreal, to McGill, to be mentors in the Cup, to speak in the X1, to support the Dobson Centre in Montreal and the startups. But it would be great if you guys came to our cities. We'd be happy to host you. We'd be happy to connect you with the McGill alumni community in these different cities, and potentially introduce some of these startups to some of the investors that are connected in our network as well too. And we're finding that that's a really great way to not just showcase McGill's entrepreneurship culture beyond Montreal, beyond Canada, but Montreal's entrepreneurship culture as a result as well. That there are things coming out of the university, out of the city, that would be of potential interest to the folks in Boston, San Francisco, Toronto, New York.
Yeah, I can go deep in any of those four areas, and yeah, it's really interesting. Maybe to go to the Lean Startup for a second. Obviously, I'm based on Eric Ries's book. What have you learned over and above, I guess, what's in the current, the current, let's say, methodology and literature?
I think what's really rewarding for me is seeing the shifts in mindsets for people in the program, and to just give you a sense of who's participating in the program. It's not just undergrads. It's a really good mix of undergraduate students, grad students, postdoc researchers, as well as professors. And for me, the focus on like the professors, the postdocs, and the grad students, that's really interesting and has been really interesting for me, because these are individuals that have spent years and years and years of doing research in the lab and building prototypes and doing all sorts of presentations at academic conferences. And they come in with some amazing technology, groundbreaking, and to use some of the vernacular, disruptive, right? That could truly disrupt a number of different fields, but they don't quite know how to take it from the lab to an actual service or a product that they can sell, because they don't know what those steps are. And so for me, I think it's being able to just highlight that, look, build, measure, learn mentality of that is central to the lean startup, but then being able to utilize tools like the business model canvas to figure out what the big picture is, because more often than not, they feel like, and I've talked with a number of them after the class, they feel like they've had blinders on this whole time, where it's just research and papers and conferences, which is still great in and of itself. But then all of a sudden there's this methodology and there's this way of just being able to take what they have and figuring out as fast as possible what the product market fit is, who their potential customers are. And for them to be able to repeat that over and over again is really rewarding, which is also part of our approach at the Dobson Centre, which is not necessarily focused on the startups themselves, but really focused on the founders, the individual founders, of providing them with the resources, the knowledge, the mentorship, and even opening up the networks for them, and then seeing where they go. Because we know for a fact that it may not be their first or second or even their third, but it could be their fourth or fifth startup where they could find that success. But it's just a matter of helping them with and equipping them with those tools.
And it sounds like what you guys are building is not just applicable to very early stage startups, particularly coming out of a university environment. Have you ever considered letting it spread beyond just university walls and maybe getting, let's say, like a company, incubation program where, National Bank can send people to come and learn about all these things that will be very hard, very kind of anathema to a more traditional corporate DNA?
That's a really good question. I think it comes back to a question of like scope and resources. We're a really small team at the Dobson Centre, and we've been a very like small and lean team for a number of years. As an example, there are 3 full-time staff, myself included, an academic director that oversees the governance of the center, and then administrative manager that provides the support and really keeps the office going. And then the rest is made up of student coordinators, some of them that are paid coordinators, paid interns, and the rest are just really volunteers that represent all faculties at McGill. So with a small team, there really is only so much that we can deliver, but it is part of our strategic growth plan to just build capacity within our own team so that we can continue to really serve the broad spectrum of the McGill community. And then in terms of scope, it's one of those things where we struggle with, because if we were to really open it up to like the broader Montreal community, it'll be hard because of the small team that we have. And so we've really just settled on the fact that we're going to be helping startups across all our programs that have at least one McGill affiliation. So they need to have a McGill affiliation, whether they're a current student, recent alumni graduated within the past 5 years, staff member or faculty member, currently at the university. But what you talked about is something that, in terms of like providing professional training or providing a way for larger companies to engage in an innovation lab model, it's on our roadmap, but not quite there yet. There's still a lot of work that we need to do to build a culture of entrepreneurship at McGill.
You spoke of resources and, some recent news of obtaining, let's say, $2 million. What are you guys planning to do with that capital?
So we're really grateful and fortunate to have gotten a $2 million donation from the Dobson Foundation to support the McGill X-1 Accelerator over the next 10 years. So for some background, the Dobson Centre was started in 1988 through a generous gift from the late John Dobson, from his foundation. This was almost 30 years ago. And the McGill X-1 has been operating in a pilot phase for the past 2 years, operating on a very lean budget. And then coming into this year, we recognized that we had something real, we had something tangible, and there were some success stories coming out of the program. And so when we approached the John Dobson Foundation for some added support to help us grow this program over the next 10 years, after deliberations, after looking into the work that we were doing, the differentiators between our program and everything else that was coming, that existed elsewhere, they found that it was really worth, providing that support to the X1 to help accelerate the growth of real companies that were creating real products that would go on to create real jobs and actually have an impact in the local Montreal and Quebec economies. And so we're really grateful because the original funders that funded the center, the supporters, they've come back and said, yes, we really like where the center's headed, where the Dobson Center's headed, and we're here to support. And it's also a great signal to all the other people that are thinking about supporting entrepreneurship at McGill, to see that there is something real coming out of the university.
Yeah, that's exciting. I imagine that your days are pretty full. How do you divide your time right now?
I think it all depends on timing of the year. So if we're focused on the Lean Startup Program, the Dobson Cup, or the X1, most of my days are focused on getting those programs up and running. But since I've assumed the role of associate director at the Dobson Centre recently, actually, it's one of those things where I'm learning how to delegate and really push it out or empower and provide responsibility to the rest of the members on my team, because my time is limited. And if I can empower my team members to take on those responsibilities, it makes my life a lot easier. And really it comes back to attracting and retaining some really incredible student talent that we have at the university, and being able to work with them in a way that they're learning a lot, and they're gaining some real life experience, emailing CEOs of different companies, asking them to come into the X1 and be part of the program, mentoring companies, organizing meetings in New York, Boston, San Francisco, Toronto, for example. So overseeing a team, there's like an art and science to it. And then I think really working with the senior leadership at the faculty at Desautels as well as at McGill to continue to position the Dobson Centre as the hub of entrepreneurship at the university.
So I imagine that you must see a ton of different pitches, right, that come your way.
Yeah.
What do you think distinguishes a good versus a bad pitch?
I think, it comes down to the individual people and the team members. If it really comes across that there's just no way that the idea is going to get off the ground, or it's just absolutely ridiculous, but the people behind it, their logic is sound and they're super passionate about it, then I think, okay, I'll give them a bit of a chance, but maybe have them think about other possibilities. Because if they've got that passion, if they've got that drive, they may be able to do something with that. Sometimes if it's a really good idea and the team needs a bit of work, that's where I'm also happy to step in and just help mentor them and help guide them, or introduce them to other people that are more knowledgeable in their area and their industry, and may be able to help them out. But yeah, no, I think I can almost tell right away if if you're presenting an idea to me and there's no passion behind it, then it's like, then why are you doing this? And I begin to question, what's the angle here? Yeah. Whereas if I can see that there's something there, how do you foster that?
How do you track success? Are there metrics? I'm sure there's some that are quantitative and qualitative.
Yeah.
So how do you get evaluated essentially?
So for the Dobson Centre, part of how we track metrics, like there's the objective numbers. So how many applications we get for each of our different programs, how many startups a year, how many startups successfully graduate and then a year later are still alive. Then we also track how much money overall they've raised collectively as a group. And so with the metrics that we have from the surveys that we've done, and we do this on an almost annual basis, we've had about 1,000 teams since 2009 when we first started the Cup go through our programs. They've 125 or so are still active today, gone on to employ about 1,200 people. And at last count, they've raised about $100 million in venture capital financing. Mind you, it was a handful of startups that raised the bulk of the funding, and then the rest was like 1.5 million here, 300,000 there, and so on.
I was going to say, why isn't this on the homepage of your website, right? Like, we have done this.
It's one of those things where since I came into the Dobson Centre just under 2 years ago, we've worked to like really position and rebrand. Sorry, to rebrand the Dobson Centre and its program so that it better aligns with Desautel and with McGill, telling that story better. Where what is the narrative of the Dobson Centre? It's like, we have done this. It is in the about section on our homepage, but part of it is our focus on less with the bragging and more with, this is how we can actually help you, and to continue to focus on that and to never lose sight of that.
Yeah, it's very admirable. I guess maybe related to the last question, but what are you most proud of since you've joined?
I think for me, when I look back to all the student coordinators and the people that have come in to work with me and my team at the Dobson Centre, and to have seen them come in being really shy, quiet individuals, they're not quite sure what the boundaries are, like how far they can, step over whatever imaginary line they've put for themselves. And then 4 months later, 8 months later, a year later, they walk around with this amazing sense of confidence that, I can do this. Or they've started to realize, I think this is how the world works, and I'm able to make this happen because this is what I did for the Dobson Cup, for the X-1, for the Lean Startup Program. These are all the different CEOs that I've talked to, I've had interactions with, I've introduced as our speakers for all these different events. That to me is the most rewarding, because you can't discount what that does, that shift in mindset does for a young person. And I sometimes forget that I'm working with students that are in their like early 20s at McGill. You can't discount like what that does for someone at this age, or 10 years from now. It'll be really exciting to see what they what they do and where they end up. Where hopefully working with the Dobson Centre may, ideally be some of the more transformative times in their young educational careers. Mm-hmm. It's
pretty powerful. I can imagine it's a very rewarding job, right? Because kids are coming in, and kids, maybe it's not the right word, but like students are coming in, and you guys are helping them think bigger and they see the potential that's out there, right? Yeah. And now you've had enough of a track record that that there's a bit of pattern recognition. This is something that can happen again. What do you keep your eye on in the space over and above? Like, what are you like reading? What are you like trying to think about more deeply these days?
So I think it's largely influenced with where McGill's situated, being a world-class research-intensive university, having a broad range of different faculties from dentistry to medicine, science, engineering, agriculture, and so on. I think I'm really interested, and I know AI is a big thing, especially here in Montreal, but I'm really interested in the future of medicine and medtech, medical technology, and where that could go. only because I feel like we've just begun to tap into that at McGill, this idea that professors and researchers go into any science lab, go into any research department, and they're probably coming up with some groundbreaking stuff. And I'll talk about two particular startups that I'm working with right now that could change the way diagnoses are done, for example. And that to me is exciting because we're just beginning to scratch the surface. So one company that we're working with that was in the X1 and won the health sciences track in the Dobson Cup is Cicad Analytics. Cicad Analytics was founded by a team of professors and postdocs in the biomedical engineering department at McGill. And what they're doing is they're doing a software big data play where based on eye tracking movements that they record from, your prototypical, almost VR software, they can run a test where they can track your eye movements, and then based on your eye movements, they're then able to do cluster analysis, where they can get a sense of whether you have a concussion or dizziness. So they can look for signs of concussion and dizziness. The bigger picture is that if the more data they have, they would theoretically be able to look for cases of over 200 neurological diseases that are linked to eye and head movements. And one of the big ones that they're not focusing on right now is Alzheimer's and the potential for unlocking research in that area. The second, so that's really exciting, right? So imagine like being able to diagnose concussions on the side of a football field as it happens, as opposed to the very sophisticated eye tracking or the sophisticated model of moving your fingers back and forth.
Super high tech model.
Super high tech, checking to see if you have a concussion. So that is there's a lot of potential there. The second one is 2D Crystal Lab, and it came out of a faculty Canada research chair, a faculty professor in the dentistry in the Faculty of Dentistry, who runs the lab with a number of postdocs, and they've after years of research, they've come up with a bioorganic nanomaterial called 2D crystals, and they're rectangular in shape, and they're 20,000 times thinner than a human hair. So they're really thin, and that's why they're called 2D crystals. And what they've been able to do is they've been able to apply this bioorganic nanomaterial to infectious dental implants that have infections. They've been able to clean the infections, so to treat the infections around the dental implant. But then what they've also discovered is that it also has bone regenerating properties. And so if you put not just being able to clean dental implants, but all sorts of implants that are metallic in your body, but also have the capacity to regenerate bone that's at twice the speed and that is just as strong. That to me is exciting, right? But then you could see where the research lies. But then how do you actually get that out into the market? And that's where the programs and the work that we do at the Dobson Centre really come in to help these founders really think through and connect and network with all sorts of people that can help bring their inventions and their research to market.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, it's not just like the research and the product, but it's like a go-to-market strategy essentially. Yeah. Maybe one or two more last questions. Like, what do you think is happening right now in your space that no one is talking about?
I think we have a really interesting perspective at the Dobson Centre, and the word innovation is thrown around a lot, and when it becomes almost jargon, it kind of loses its meaning. But the way we see innovation at the Dobson Centre is that it's invention times commercialization, right? You need the two together to really have truly disruptive innovation. On the invention side of things, I think McGill has that with all of the research and the millions of dollars in research funding that goes to the university every year across all the departments, across all the teaching hospitals. But if there isn't that commercialization component, then you don't really have innovation, because you have invention and that's fantastic, but how is that impacting society? And that's That's where we're coming from. And then on the other side, if you just have commercialization, but really no invention, for example, I've got a pen and I can sell it to you at a much lower price, right? Well, there's a commercialization aspect to it, but it's not really innovative because I'm just selling you a cheaper pen. But you need the two together. And I think our approach at the Dobson Centre is, again, to be the central hub for entrepreneurship at the university, where we're finding, teaching, and developing entrepreneurs, regardless of faculty, regardless of discipline, to get them thinking like entrepreneurs, but more importantly, equipping them with the tools, the resources that they need to make that happen. And I think that fits within the broader scope of not just McGill, but like university institutions in general, where if you're part of a university or an educational institution, you need to think about how you're going to be relevant in the 21st century. Like, what is it that's going to set you apart, with the advent of platforms like Coursera and edX, where anyone can learn anything pretty much for free nowadays online. What is it that is going to help you attract and retain the best student talent to produce amazing graduates that can go on and impact society, right? And I think it's that experiential learning component that couples invention with commercialization that could really help set your organization apart. So that's something that I think about constantly, because that's really the core of our approach at the Dobson Centre. Yeah,
it's amazing, Renjie. Really, really insightful. One last question: where can people learn more about yourself or the Dobson Centre?
Sure. So you could go to mcgill.ca/Dobson, Dobson, on our website. But then we also have a blog. So if you just Google Dobson Chronicles, or if you go to dobsonchronicles.com, you'll be able to find more information on all of our events, our programs, recaps from the things that we've done, and even a list of upcoming things that we're doing.
It's amazing. Thanks for your time today. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Point of No Return podcast. Never miss an episode by clicking on the subscribe button on iTunes or Google Play.